I'll make a brand new start of it in old New York.
Burbling up from the streets. It's jazz. And it must not the like.
James Mercer Langston Hughes, known as Langston Hughes, was an American poet, novelist, and playwright. His work focused on African American themes, making him a primary contributor to the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. Langston Hughes was born on February 1, 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. His parents separated after his birth. Hughes was raised by his maternal grandmother until his early teens. After his grandmother's death, he went to live with his mother, and they settled in Cleveland, Ohio. At this point in his life, he began writing poetry and was influenced by Carl Sandburg and Walt Whitman. In 1921, Hughes returned back to the U.S. after spending a year in Mexico with his father after graduating high school in 1920. He studied at Columbia University and became a part of Harlem's cultural movement. He dropped out of Columbia in 1922 and worked different jobs in New York before spending a brief time in Paris publishing poetry. In 1924, Hughes returned to the U.S. In 1925, he met American poet Vachel Lindsay. Lindsay was fascinated by Hughes' work, so he promoted Hughes' poetry. Hughes' poem, The Weary Blues, won first prize in a magazine literary competition opportunity. Hughes also received a scholarship to attend Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. During his studies, his poetry caught the attention of novelist Carl Van Vechten, who helped Hughes publish his first book of poetry. In 1926, The Weary Blues was published. The book became popular due to its poetic style and Hughes' commitment to black themes. Hughes was amongst the first to use jazz dialect to depict the life of urban blacks in his work. He graduated from Lincoln in 1929 and published his first novel, Not Without Laughter. In 1940, he started his contribution to the Chicago Defender, creating a comic character named Jesse B. Semple, also known as Simple. Hughes utilized the character to explore urban working-class black themes and to address racial issues. The charm of Simple lies in his uninhibited pursuit of two universal goals: understanding and security. Simple was a character people related to, suffered their pangs, experienced their joys, reasoned their ways, dreamed their dreams, and voiced their fears. During the 1950s and 1960s, he published several books in his Simple series and the second installment of his autobiography, I Wander as I Wander. Hughes was the first African American to earn his living solely from his writing and public lectures, partly due to the acceptance and love he received from. He used his poetry to illustrate that there is no lack within the Negro people of beauty, strength, and power. He chose to identify with plain African Americans because he saw more truth in doing so. Hughes' poetry focused on workers, roustabouts, and job hunters in New York, Washington, and Chicago. Essentially, Hughes faithfully recorded the nuances of black life and its frustrations. Hughes died from prostate cancer on May 22, 1967. Now we can get on to the poem, Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? In Harlem, Hughes helped readers contemplate their dreams and what it means to postpone them. The poem reflects the impatience with slow pace of the civil rights movement and addresses the limitations of the American dream for African Americans. The tone of this poem is caustic and somber, paralleling the growing frustration amongst African Americans who waited for true equality. The poem was originally titled, What Happens to a Dream Deferred, but he changed the title to Harlem, which immediately adds identity to the poem. Harlem is a neighborhood of intellectual thought and artistic innovation in New York City, which had become a sanctuary for African Americans due to the results of discrimination. The identity makes it clear that Hughes asks the question to African Americans specifically. Hughes uses vivid analogies to evoke the image of a postponed dream. These images are not outright violent, but they slightly have a dark tone to them. Each image is potent enough to make the reader feel the discarded dreams. He denotes that a dream does not simply vanish, but rather undergoes evolution, resulting in physical state of decay. Hughes portrays that African Americans cannot aspire because of the environment of oppression surrounding them. Their dreams fester for so long that they end up exploding. The first line refers to an ignored and forgotten dream. Deferred means postponed or delayed, so he asks, what happens when the dream of desegregation is delayed? Throughout the poem, Hughes answers the questions by utilizing similes and alliteration to describe the outcome of the Black community if their dreams continue to be deferred. Dreams drying up like a raisin refers to the gradual shriveling of a dream or person. The image of a festering sore depicts resentment and suggests danger. The line stinks like a rotten meat evokes anger and bitterness because here stink is used as an offensive and vulgar word. The next line, crusts and sugar over, portrays that people smile and pretend to be okay when really they're not. Sag like a heavy load depicts a subsequent depression. In the last line, he ends the poem with the interpretation of threat. The italicized line gives it an insidious quality. The word explode makes us think of bombs or fireworks and things that can't contain themselves any longer. Society takes this as a warning and that the continual denial to equality could result in violent destruction and social unrest. The poem is free verse and has an irregular meter. There are 11 lines and 4 stanzas, and all but one line are questions in order to prompt readers to think about the social movement. Some lines are short and monosyllabic, while others are long and full of syllables. There is a rhyme scheme as seen in lines 3 and 5, 6 and 8, and 10 and 11. However, the rhyme scheme keeps the reader engaged lyrically, not to emphasize ideas. The first 8 lines are weak and jagged, while the last 3 are unified. The inconsistency of the poem makes the reader feel frustrated. Hughes does so to make us feel the consequences of deferring dreams, and does so especially when he concludes the poem with an ultimatum. The repetition of the word like gives the poem a structural and rhetorical unity as each comparison answers and expands on the initial question. Lastly, the 2 dashes act as a dramatic pause for emphasis on what follows. Here's a quote by Mr. Hughes himself, and it's something we should all remember.